Spoilers are a very unique issue when it comes to consuming any kind of media. In simple terms, to spoil something means to expose the ending or twists to a story to somebody before they experience that story for themselves. They've been an issue for presumably as long as stories have been told, but have become much more prominent with the rise of movies, shows, and games within the last century. One of the first and most prominent examples of spoiler discussion comes from the end credits of the French psychological horror film Les Diaboliques in 1955. After finishing the movie, viewers were presented with the following message: "Don't be diabolical. Do not destroy the interest that your friends may have in this movie. Do not tell them what you have seen. Thank you on their behalf." One of the first uses of the word spoiler, however, can be traced a little farther forward to the April 1971 issue of the National Lampoon, an American comedy magazine. An excerpt from an article written by Doug Kenny reads, "Spoilers, what are they? Simply the trick ending to every mystery novel and movie you're ever liable to see. Saves time and money." It's easy to find this to be a weird take on spoilers, something we normally see as an objectively bad thing, but this isn't a standalone opinion. In 2011, a study by two professors in UC San Diego hypothesized and concluded that subjects actually enjoyed spoiled stories more than unspoiled stories. The crux of the experiment was as follows. A group of students at UCSD were chosen and given stories to read. One half was given spoilers on a story's endings beforehand, and the other half wasn't. Participants were then asked to rate how much they enjoyed the novels, and found that those who had been spoiled actually enjoyed the stories more than those who weren't. To further support their hypothesis, subjects were asked how much they enjoyed the books in the middle of the stories rather than at the end. This eliminated the possibility of subjects saying they enjoyed the stories more simply because they ended exactly how they expected them to. Thus, they felt confident concluding that spoilers can increase the enjoyment of a piece of media. However, I don't entirely agree with this conclusion, at least in a weird way. In this study, and in almost every study looking into a similar subject, participants were asked to rank their enjoyment of each story. I think raw enjoyment, however, is only one way in which we can appreciate a story. For example, one of the most acclaimed TV shows in recent times is Breaking Bad. It's a fantastic show, but as you watch it more and more and get deeper into the story, it's very unpredictable and tense at times. You get feelings of anxiety, fear, sadness, pity, and perhaps most important, unfamiliarity. As most of you probably know, humans are creatures of habit. We naturally feel most comfortable when we know what's going on and how things will play out. This is why I disagree with the methods previously described in the aforementioned UC San Diego study. While participants did rate their enjoyment in the middle rather than the end of the stories, simply knowing how things will end up still plays a major factor. If you're in the middle of a movie or show and know exactly which characters live, which ones die, and where everyone ends up, any feelings of unfamiliarity and tenseness are removed. You don't need to worry about caring about this character or feeling their struggle. You already know they aren't going to make it. Because of this, the more impactful emotions that any one story can present might be lost. Feelings of struggle, pushing against the odds, doing whatever they can to make it to the end. Whatever feelings the writer of the story wanted us to feel or relate to, they can be heavily diminished when we don't feel the need to focus on things emotionally. Because we don't need to feel stressed, we instead feel a slight sense of comfort in knowing the outcome beforehand, hence the enjoyment result in the UCSD study. This is where I'd like to contrast two very different ideas: enjoyment and impact. Enjoyment is the stat measured in many similar studies to the one mentioned today and is an important aspect of any media. However, it's important to state how enjoyment doesn't necessarily mean any one piece of media will leave a lasting impact on you. Watching an episode of SpongeBob or something is a great example. It's not meant to leave an incredible lasting effect on its own, it's just meant to be enjoyed. Impact, however, is the term I use to refer to stories and media which truly stick with us. Think of your favorite game, movie, book, anything. Those are the pieces of media that have impacted you deeply. You might think about them often, every day even, and this is why it's important that we consume media that has lasting effects on us. While spoilers may not necessarily remove our ability to enjoy stories, I do believe that they remove a lot of our ability to be impacted by them. A limitation of the study we've mentioned today is just that. It's a study. It's not a measure of deep, lasting impacts that last years, but rather a quick measure of enjoyment midway through a novel. Where I believe it misses isn't necessarily that it's wrong in its conclusion, but rather that it doesn't consider this impact aspect. To put things more simply, the difference between enjoyment and impact is most clearly demonstrated like this. To simply enjoy something, often pretty light emotions are involved. You might say or think things like, "This is nice," "I like this character," or "That's funny." All meaningful yet simple emotions that are generally positive. Meanwhile, impactful media invokes more intense emotions: fear, anxiety, strong laughter, sadness, hope, and many more. I believe the most important distinction here is that enjoyment often rarely involves any negative emotions. Like I mentioned earlier, having a story spoiled for us often removes a lot of things like anxiety entirely from the equation. Because you know who ends up where and how things play out, you don't need to worry about it. And with all this in mind, it's important to mention quickly that there's nothing wrong with just trying to enjoy something. I know I've had many stressful nights where I want to watch a movie or something, but I'm not looking to be super stressed out while doing so. So I'll just read a quick synopsis on Wikipedia to keep things chill. It makes the experience less impactful, but still enjoyable, and that's totally fine if that's what you want. Going back to our example of Breaking Bad, it is undoubtedly my favorite show. The roller coaster of emotions you go through watching it sticks in your mind long after you finish it. When certain characters go through tense situations, you do as well. I wouldn't define the show as inherently enjoyable to watch in their traditional sense. It can be really stressful at times, but the lasting impact the show as a whole had on me easily makes up for it. And the same can be said for what are probably some of your favorite pieces of media. When you went through whatever that favorite media is for you, I can guarantee that you felt a lot more than just, "this is nice," while doing so. When media presents us with more than one emotion, we go from thinking, "this is a happy story," to, "this is a story about people who live through and feel different things just like I do." And when we're spoiled on a story beforehand, it's so much easier to see said story as nothing more than that, a story you're being told, rather than an experience. If you're currently alive living anywhere in this area, there's a good chance you remember the 2015 indie hit Undertale. It's highly praised for countless reasons, but many of those were reasons hidden behind certain elements of the story or game that could be spoiled. The great writing and jokes, darker story elements of certain characters, and of course, entirely different types of playthroughs hidden behind walls of various types of gameplay. Tons of things about the game resonated with the internet to make it the monolith it is today, but what you need to understand for the sake of this video is that, as an experience, playing through Undertale for the first time is a pretty fantastic experience, which for many was and still is incredibly hard to beat. Meanwhile, a younger durrbill in 2015, caught up in all the craze, looked up everything on the wiki before even playing the game. That's right, instead of even just watching a playthrough online, I jumped straight from seeing the characters pop up on my timeline straight to reading about every inch of the game's lore, completely out of order. I spoiled myself to the worst possible degree without any care in the world. And guess what? Despite all that, once I actually did get around to playing the game that I knew every ending to, I still found myself hooked. Playing through it myself immersed me so much deeper into the world and the story that it gave to me more than any write-up or video ever could. And with that, you might be thinking, well, if you got completely spoiled but still had a great time playing, doesn't that contradict what you said earlier about spoilers weakening a game's impact? Well, semantically speaking, not at all. While spoilers can certainly lessen a story's impact, it doesn't remove that impact entirely. And this is where I shift the focus from the experience that I did have with Undertale to the experience that could have been. I had a great time like I mentioned, but had I gone in completely blind, it undoubtedly would have been an even more memorable experience. Jokes that I had already seen could have actually made me laugh out loud. Powerful moments that seemed a bit sad could have actually made me tear up. I know this because one time I did go into a game completely blind, with a game called One Shot. I won't spoil things here for reasons listed in literally this entire video thus far, but to say that the game left an impact on me would be a massive understatement. After playing it, I became entirely involved with its community, eventually speedrunning it and creating a server myself focused around just that. And along the way, met people who, without going into too much detail, have impacted my life in ways that I cannot imagine my life without. Now, of course, I'm not saying this will happen anytime you play or watch something without being spoiled, but I am saying that when you do find something like that, getting the deepest possible experience out of it is what inspires us to do so many things. We meet new friends, get inspired to try out new things, or even create our own pieces of media, as I've tried to do here. Experiencing different kinds of art, be it movies, games, or anything else, at their deepest level is one of the most important cogs in the machine that we call society. And that is exactly why it is so fucking annoying that spoilers make it so difficult to talk about these things. This is likely the part of the video that you saw coming, and let me start you out with a scenario that you've probably experienced before. Let's say there's a piece of media that you really love, say a show. You like it so much that you want to tell all your friends about it so they can watch it too. But of course, you can't just tell them every part of the story right away. That would spoil their experience when they definitely get around to watching it. This situation is probably one of the most frustrating conundrums that humanity has ever faced. It is so frustrating trying to convey to someone the power that a story has without actually mentioning specific aspects of the story which contain spoilers. If you're the one on the other end of this conversation, rolling your eyes about how your friend swears One Piece gets great after episode 542, I get it. Watching something like that is a big commitment, and it's impossible to tell how actually good a show is from a source that is, quite literally, dude, trust me. Meanwhile, if you are that friend trying to convince someone else that something is cool, you know how it sounds. You know how so many aspects that you find about this show to be cool just can't be mentioned, lest they be spoiled. It's very frustrating and something that I relate with deeply. Being a person who makes videos for people to enjoy, I often make videos about games. Games can have stories, stories can make for videos, and a video I made about a story was this video here, about the game Omori. This may sound like me complaining for a few minutes, but just trust me that this is an important concept. As you may already know, Omori is a very story-heavy game, and thus, being spoiled on its contents can drastically change how you experience it when playing it. Because of this, when I wanted to make a video about Omori, I faced a dilemma. Either I make a video which includes all the game's story going into as much depth as possible, but alienating any audience who hasn't already played the game through, since they don't want to be spoiled. This being made worse by the fact that, up until that point, almost all of my audience watched me for Team Fortress 2 content, meaning it's very rare that any of my viewer base would have an interest in an Omori video that contains spoilers. Thus, I chose the second option, to cover the topics about the game's story that I wanted to without spoiling the main plot. I opened the video with this disclaimer, that while some story elements are discussed, major plot points remain unmentioned. I figured this would be a good compromise, making it so my non-Omori focused audience could still enjoy the video. However, this approach had many problems. For one, just looking at the video title and thumbnail, nothing about it says that spoilers aren't included. I know this is an issue because many of my regular viewers have told me personally that they chose not to click on the video at all because they didn't want to be spoiled. To this I responded by mentioning that I made the video with that in mind, and that I don't spoil any major plot points in the video, so it's fine for the uninitiated to watch. However, they responded once more, noting that any spoilers, even minor, can change how someone experiences a story, and this is entirely correct. Going into an experience completely blind is vastly different than knowing even just a few key plot points that are revealed early on. Like I mentioned before, I went into one shot after seeing nothing more than a few screenshots, and it's very likely that it wouldn't have had nearly the same impact had I known just a few more details. The TLDR of this idea is that when you make content about a story, it's very hard to do so without spoiling a story to some strong degree. This is especially tough because there are a lot of games with stories that I want to cover on my channel, but doing so almost requires me to spoil said stories, which alienates anyone who hasn't already engaged with the games that I want to cover. It's a tough situation where I have to compromise no matter what decision I make, but enough about my own experiences. It's time we actually get into the meat of things. While we've covered some interesting ground on spoilers and some of the more subtle reasons that they can be problematic, we haven't really reached any real takeaways yet. It's interesting for sure, but what can you actually walk away from this video with? What do we actually do about spoilers? It's a weird question, and I'd equate it with a question like, what do we do about gravity? It's inherent with the nature of the universe, it has its upsides and downsides, but ultimately we aren't getting rid of it anytime soon. Spoilers are similar in that we can't really do anything about them in terms of solving the issue. With any story being told, there always exists the risk of being spoiled, and we can't do much about that, at least on the grand scale of things. On the personal level, however, I think the best thing that we can do is to try out new things more often, completely blind. I know how generic this sounds, and I know that if you're anything like me, you're infinitely more likely to go play that game you already know front to back, or rewatch that comfort movie you enjoy. Like I said earlier, sometimes you've had a long day and don't want to go neck deep into an unknown story, and that's perfectly fine. I've been doing the same thing for years most days. But something that I, and probably many others out there should learn is how to give new stories a chance more often. Go watch that weird-ass show your friend recommended. Go buy some game that looks a bit neat on Steam that you know nothing about. That's how I've had some of the most memorable experiences I've ever had. Like I said before, experiencing new stories as full steam ahead as possible is what inspires us to go out and try new things, make new friends, and maybe even create our own stories for others to enjoy.